Welcome to Around the Table. I'm Matt Langdon. In this episode, I interviewed Brad Faye of Superhero Faces. We recorded this months ago, but this is probably a much better time to release it, as the movie that Brad talks about, Geek and You Shall Find, has been released on iTunes and I think other streaming platforms. He's also at San Diego Comic-Con right now. I'm having some flashback memories of great times at San Diego Comic-Con with Chase and the group at Pop Culture Hero Coalition. So in this interview, we talked about pop culture, hero's journey that Brad's a big student of, and lots more. And this is all stuff that's really been central to my work and interest in heroism from day one. So it was really good to be reminded of the importance of stories and communities. So I'll leave it there and get straight into Brad Faye. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Thanks, Matt.
Can you give us a quick introduction as to who you are and I guess what you've been doing? Because I know your mind is on a film right now, but getting up to that, where did that come from?
Well, it started off just kind of being like a lifelong geek. What I was fanatical about always seemed to change, whether it was like comic books as a kid to then getting a little bit older and getting into sports and then kind of gravitating back towards that again. And then, it's kind of been a weird, like, kind of little journey in the sense of, like, a lot of the stuff that when I was a kid I didn't like Star Wars I wasn't big into. But now going back, like, as an adult, I was like, that's really cool. Like, what about it didn't I, like or get? And I'm like, maybe I was too young. Sometimes you get introduced to something, like, a little too young, and you're not, like, quite ready for it. You don't see, like, the layers to it, and you're like, well, I didn't find this entertaining, so I don't like it. But then you go back, and you see all these different layers that are there, and you're like, I can relate to this right now. Oh, I can kind of connect with that right now. So I've kind of gotten geekier as I've gotten older, which has been really weird. And I started working on a book. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and I always feel the desire to kind of express the views of people who regular fans might not be, most comic book fans aren't going to jump and say, who's Joseph Campbell? I want to learn more about him. So any opportunity I can get to say, hey, this applies to you, and here's why you should know about him, and here's why it might make you even a bigger superhero fan than you were before. So I started down this whole path of kind of looking for the same motifs and themes and stages that Joseph Campbell was pointing out, but kind of wanting to do it with like newer mythologies that I thought fans of Star Wars and Star Trek and Doctor Who and Game of Thrones might kind of say like, oh, I didn't realize all those same patterns are in the same things that I like, and here's how it might apply to my life and might help me on a day-to-day basis. So I kind of started going down that path, and then after I was with the company for about 11 years, and they let go of about half of our department one day, and it was, could have been a lot more stunning than it was, but, as corny as it might sound, like thanks to Joseph Campbell's work, I was like, okay, let me treat this as like my call to adventure. Like, what do I want to do with the time I have right now that I normally wouldn't? And I always knew, I'm like, well, I can get back to the book at any time. I could work a 9-to-5 job when I find one again and kind of continue doing the book by night. But I knew if I wanted to do a documentary, I said now would be the time to do that because I have time. I can schedule interviews. I can travel if need be, and things that I can't do once I'm back, at an office job again. So that was about 2.5 years ago, and I've been kind of working on documentaries ever since, and I found ways to squeeze it in with a 9-to-5 schedule, as difficult as it is. And the book is still something that's my baby, and I want to conclude it, but I just haven't had a break, like, since working on documentary stuff. So that's kind of how I got here now.
Awesome. So a couple of things there. I feel your pain I don't know if it's the pain around the book. I just submitted pretty close to final edit of my book after many years of trying to make that happen. So
right.
What I want to touch on the thing you said right towards the start there was you started being a geek and a fan, and then went to sports, and then came back again. Did you find that sports just grabbed your attention, and so you weren't really focusing on other stuff, or were you still reading comics while you were playing sports, or did that just take over?
I was living in New York. I grew up in New York and was a diehard comic book fan. Every Wednesday when school got out, I went to the comic book store, picked up my comics, for the week, kind of went home, and that was kind of the routine. And then I moved out to Arizona right when I had started high school, and there wasn't a comic book store anywhere near me. So part of that was the problem of I wasn't driving yet, so it kind of became like, oh, okay, now I've got to find rides to the comic book store, as opposed to before it was walk across the street. So that was kind of difficult, but there was a sports card store not too far away. So that kind of became like the new time-consuming passion of collecting sports cards and following sports to see how these guys were doing. And then I just got so swept up in this. And then once I was a little bit older and I was driving again, I forget how I ended up one of my best friends had always remained reading comics. So would continue to tell me things that were being done. And so it was never a thing where I was like, I'm too old for that. It was just more of a didn't have time. But he would tell me like, oh, Kevin Smith is writing comic books now. And, I just read this storyline and it's really good. So I went to a comic book store and I said, hey, I'm someone who hasn't read comic books for 8 or 9 years. Can you point me in a good direction? And he recommended the Daredevil Kevin Smith storyline, which I read. And after that, slowly but surely, I was like hooked again. And I'm like, now that I have a car and I can control my own fate. So I was doing both for a little bit. And now I've just been totally back in the superheroes and still pay attention to sports a little bit, but not nearly as much as I was.
It's interesting because the reason I picked that up was I think people that are deep into sports are as geeky as people who are deep into comics, right? Like, yeah. It's not so much these days, but when I was reading X-Men, it was pretty geeky to know the first appearance of all the characters. But if it was in baseball, then well, of course what their rookie season and what their batting average was in their third season, and but we have that. There's something in our personality that wants that, right? We want to dive into a group, I suppose, right? It's I'm a geek, so this is how I live, or I'm a baseball fan and this is how I live, or football, or whatever it might be.
Are you familiar with Dr. Janina Scarlett's work?
Yeah.
We interviewed her for the film, and she had a great line that the best way to look at geek right now is the term is just synonymous with passion. So instead of looking at it, the word geek, obviously had a negative connotation for a long time, but now it's just kind of become synonymous with passion. It's like, what are you passionate about? Like you said, like if you're a sports fan, a guy's rookie season, when he had his best year, how's that any different than knowing like Gambit's first appearance or the Silver Surfer's first appearance? I mean, it's all, and it's healthy. It's you should have something like that. Yeah. It'd be scary to me to think of if there was a time in my life where there wasn't something I can, go all in on or want to learn as much about. Like, I don't know what I would do with my time otherwise.
Right. Yeah, there is that that moment that we're in where I think I saw something just recently, a headline about Game of Thrones coming back and how fantasy's finally the genre of fantasy is completely mainstream. And I think, man, 25 years ago, I couldn't imagine the world that we're living in with Avengers being the biggest movie and Game of Thrones being the biggest TV show. It's just we've got access to all these fan cultures that we just couldn't imagine 25 years ago.
It's crazy. I actually spent my day half recovering from all the film festival stuff this weekend, and the other half was doing like research on stuff. And I was doing Game of Thrones research and looking up all the things that have kind of helped influence that universe. And I know George R. R. Martin was a big like role playing fan, big in the role playing. Mm-hmm. And I came across some stuff from like Dungeons and Dragons of these different characters and kind of where their story went. And I just started thinking about it, and I'm like, I wonder if like this character is going to do that if he based that character on this, Dungeons and Dragons character. And then I said, who knew that like the quote unquote cool kids club, like would flip right now if they found out, like you might find out the ending of Game of Thrones by researching Dungeons and Dragons, and all these people who swore they would never have anything to do with fantasy or like you said, like anything that 25 years ago was no way it'd be cool. Now those people would be like doing a Google search for like a Dungeons and Dragons character to kind of see like, ooh, this might give me some answers about Game of Thrones, which is, yeah, crazy for people like us who have kind of been into it for a while.
Yeah.
Never think this thing.
Yeah, all of a sudden the knowledge that you have from from being in that geeky subculture 25 years ago is super valuable for people now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people want to like. I want to go see Avengers with you, so I can ask you questions after and stuff like that. I'm like, I never would have thought someone would be like, I want to go see a comic book movie with you, so you can give me some like feedback on things that this might be setting up for a future movie, and you can answer my questions for me. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually this coming weekend playing D&D, or actually even more geekier, Warhammer Fantasy roleplay with 3 adults that live in my town that I just couldn't have imagined doing 5 years ago, let alone 25. So it's fascinating how people are much more content or open to show that they love these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
tell me,
that's the best way to put it. Yeah, you're right.
tell me about the movie then. So I knew about this years ago, and then I just saw maybe Janina mentioned it on Twitter, and then I didn't make the connection between the name of the movie and you, I think, and was like, "Oh, this is a great idea for a movie," and then emailed you, and you're like, yes, you've already talked to me." So yeah, tell us about the movie, because you've been all in it this weekend.
Yeah, so I mean, it really started off kind of, I don't want to say like an homage to Joseph Campbell, but kind of doing what I wanted to do with the book in terms of, talking about Joseph Campbell and why his work is just as relevant today. And I mean, the problem I had with The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is the book Joseph Campbell's best known for, was I, I had a friend who recommended it to me and said, I really think you'll like it. He said, it's kind of scholarly though. So just like a heads up, and I kind of took it as like a slight of like, oh, I'm not smart enough to understand it. Okay, I'll show you. Read it, had no idea about it. He was totally right. I could not grasp any of it, but something about it like I liked, and like there was something about it that made me want to know more about it. And I don't know what that was, and I wish I knew what it was, but something, even though I had no idea what I was reading about, still stood out to me and be like, I can tell there's something about this I'm going to like once I figure it out. And I realized what the problem was is I hadn't read Greek mythology since I had been a kid. I hadn't read Gilgamesh, and I didn't know about a lot of the King Arthur stories. So the problem I was having was I don't know a lot of the stories that he's referencing kind of casually, assuming that I have like a vast knowledge of it. So I went back and started to reread those stories, which still a lot of times like the Aeneid and a lot of those stories like aren't easy reading either. But what helped me was I started to make those little connections of like, oh, this guy's like Batman. Oh, okay, so it's kind of like, the powerful ring. Like, I get that. Like, I've seen the Lord of the Rings movie and read the Lord of the Rings books. Like, I know about a powerful ring and, absolute power corrupts. Like, I get that. This is the same thing. So then I started to understand those stories a little bit better. And then from there, I went back and read Hero with a Thousand Faces again. And I'm like, yes, people need to know about this. This is important. Let me kind of, share it with as many people as I can. So, and that's when I reached out to you, and I was speaking with a lot of people who had a vast familiarity with Joseph Campbell's work. But as time went on, it kind of evolved into a lot more of the superhero stuff kind of became more and more mainstream while this was going on. And I started meeting people who were using superheroes specifically to get out their message and to, help students understand why this stuff is cool and why it's relevant to their lives. So it kind of shifted, and I still now am just now working on like all the Joseph Campbell stuff I got, and it's a very short part of the film. It's unbelievable. Like that ended up being, because a lot of the feedback was get people into it a little bit more. Like maybe do more of the superhero stuff, and then your next movie, then you do a little bit more of the Joseph Campbell stuff, and people will already have a familiarity with him because they'll be like, okay, I remember you talked about this guy before, and this is how he might have viewed Superman versus Batman and things of that nature, and then kind of work people into a little bit more and more. So that's kind of like the plan now, is to kind of, spoon feed the Joseph Campbell stuff to people who might not be all in about it right away, But as they go on, maybe we'll want to start to read the Odyssey and the Iliad and all those books that kind of were, for me, like school reading, and I wasn't too excited about doing that, so
Right.
I can relate to that.
Are there any books or texts or articles or films that you came across after that first reading that were easier to get into? Because I think the Hero of a Thousand Faces is not a fun book to read for anyone. So
No.
it comes better later. So my
Yeah.
introduction to Campbell was through growing up with Star Wars and hearing that George Lucas met with Campbell to get the film to get the story better. So that's what sort of got me into it. And I didn't read Hero of a Thousand Faces for well, I don't think I finished it even. I remember it was 2007 that I finally was like, okay, I probably should read this book because I keep referencing it.
I talk about it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So have you got other entry points for people that you recommend?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you pointed out because, yeah, I always leave that part out of the story of kind of like, oh, I read back, didn't understand it, so I went and read, King Arthur stories, and then I went back to it and it was fine. No, it wasn't that easy. I'm kind of simplifying it a little bit. It helped a lot to read, like, I read and watched, like, The Power of Myth, where Joseph Campbell spoke with Bill Moyers for, seemed like a 10-hour interview, but I can watch it from beginning to end and be entertained, like, the whole time. So I don't want to say it was like Joseph Campbell putting it in layman's terms, but like that's kind of what it was for me. It was like when I went back and started reading, transcriptions of his lectures and things that weren't so difficult to kind of grasp, and then be like, oh, okay, I get what he's trying to say here. And then when you go back and read the Hero with a Thousand Faces, you're like, okay, it's that same thought he expressed in the Mythos lectures or something like that, and especially with the Mythos lectures, they're showing images of what he's referencing and kind of saying, right here, you see this. You're not getting that luxury with the books. So then when he references something in the book, you're like, okay, I remember him showing that and discussing it for an extended period of time. Now I get what he's saying in these one or two sentences. So yes, it was a lot more complicated a journey than I made it. So I'm glad you said that. Yes, I went back and read a lot of his transcripts and a lot of the other books that the Joseph Campbell Foundation have since like transcribed and kind of put together and picked and pulled from all these different lectures and put them together. So when Joseph Campbell's explaining it to you,
Yep.
I think it comes off a little bit easier than like reading a text.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Great. So what's the name of the film?
Geek and You Shall Find.
Okay. So break that down for us. Where did that come from?
It's really. We were talking about it the other day. Me and the other co-producers we had always thought like that was a relatively new name, but then we went back and found like we were going through and we're getting the film submitted, so we've got to start finding all these contracts, and we did not do any of that stuff right like we should have, of keeping everything in order. You're like, oh, okay, like we'll be fine. We don't need contracts. Like who cares? Like no one's gonna worry about that. And now you're like, well, to be safe, maybe we should have all this stuff together to show that these people like said it was okay to film them for these interviews. And then we noticed like on those contracts it said Geek and You Shall Find. We're like, has the name really been around like that long? And it's just one of those things like I don't know if it's serendipitous, but it like really just fits perfect. It's kind of, we want to show how being a geek is not only okay, but that it might just be the best thing that's ever happened to you. And what better way to express that than saying geek, whatever it might mean, like Janina said, like just being passionate about something and trying to find a way to use that as paying it forward and finding a good, which I know is a lot of what your work kind of, is based upon, is like, what am I here for? What can I do that might make this world, better for me and others around me, and in an ideal world beyond that. And I think one of the not easiest ways to do that is to find something you're passionate about, because then it's not work. Like a lot of people say to me, it's kind of fun when people are like, I don't know how you do all this. I don't know how you manage it. And you go, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But at the same time, I do kind of think in the back of my head, like, it's not that tough. People are like, oh, like, it's so commendable that you've like stayed this dedicated to it. And I'm like, well, what else would I do? Like, like you wouldn't tell someone like, and not to demean it, like people don't have to work hard to achieve these things. But at the same time, like, it's easy to watch Game of Thrones. Like, you wouldn't be like, man, I can't believe you put in all those hours watching it. Like, that is nuts. Like, someone's response would be like, but I enjoy doing it. Like, it's not like an arduous task that, like, I didn't want to do. So to me, like the ultimate goal is to find what you're passionate about and find a way to use that for good, kind of.
So the and you shall find is more that you'll find ways that you can help others. That's the
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I don't know if that's something. I wish I knew if that's something that you have to work at. It seems from a lot of the people I've talked to, like, Dr. Travis Langley and all of these people, it wasn't like they've necessarily set out and said, like, okay, with my work, I'm going to reach and help all these people. That's kind of just happened, So, maybe sometimes you need to say, what can I do to kind of serve like a greater purpose in myself with my fandom? But a lot of times you just find that I mean, even again, going back to professional athletes, like how many people have played professional sports and now are out there doing things in the community because of what they were able to accomplish by professional sports. And maybe some of them were conscientious of that going in, like, oh, I want to use my stardom to help the world. And some maybe look back and say, like, oh, that was really cool, like the stuff I was able to do for my community thanks to sports. So it'd be interesting to see, like, if it's something that people feel they need to work at, or if it just kind of happens when you do what you're passionate about. Eventually, it's going to help inspire others to do the same.
So, what's the elevator pitch for the film? How do you describe it when you're when you're trying to get it across quickly?
And basically, three friends that were at Comic Cons talking to people about their costumes and why they cosplayed and finding out there were deeper meanings to those questions, and us kind of discovering, well, what is it about superheroes that we kind of gravitate towards, and why now more than ever before.
All right. So is that connected to the superhero faces then? That's
Yes, the Superhero Faces kind of started as a website for us to promote the book, and it's kind of saying let's build an audience, let's get people who can get behind this idea, who like what we're doing, and it started as just short videos. We were kind of doing short videos about the Herald. So here are examples of the Herald archetype from mythology. Here's some more recognizable examples from modern day storytelling. And here's how you can relate it in your life. Who might be a herald in your life? And us kind of wanting to build this community of people that maybe upload YouTube videos to us and say, like, I notice my herald is this person, or my goddess, or what's my temptress? Like, what is it that might lead me astray at times or tempt me not to go down the path I should be going down? Like, kind of encouraging people to acknowledge how those pertain to them specifically, and kind of building a community of people that are saying, like, how they're on the hero's journey and in what ways they've been able to use fiction to help themselves in their day-to-day lives was the original, like, intent of the site. And then once it spawned into the film, it just kind of became like okay, everything's moving really fast. We don't have time to I mean, there were three of us, now there's four of us. Like, so it's hard to keep up with everything, but that was our intent when initially, like, building the website.
right. So what were you discovering early on with the cosplayers? Because of all the sort of outward expressions of geekdom, that one seems that it would have been the hardest to make go wide, and yet average people are cosplaying every time there's a Comic Con. I mean, and the detail. This is stuff that was very fringe not too long ago, and now
Yeah.
it's just people do it. So, what were you getting out of those initial conversations with cosplayers? Why were they doing it?
I mean, full disclosure, to be really honest, like, and this isn't something I really share, but I was one of those people that was super geek. But I always remember when people would ask, I go to San Diego Comic Con every year. I go to every convention there is. I get totally caught up in it. But I know whenever someone would ask me, like, are you one of those people that dress up? Like, my initial response would be like, oh, no, no, no. Like, and it really, like, ashames me now, like, now that I know so much more about what cosplay is and really means. But, I mean, maybe that also helps to show, like, hey, if there are people out there that are negative about it, I was never negative about it. I never thought it was a bad thing or a weird thing. But I felt like that gave me a little bit more cachet of, like, hey, don't discredit me because I'm going to a comic convention. I'm not like that level of wanting to go to a comic convention. And then, as time went on, I just became, I mean, who doesn't, whether you cosplay or not, who doesn't want to see someone dressed up as a character they like and take a picture with them? Like that's cool. It represents something I like. So that became kind of a gateway, and you start chit-chatting with cosplayers and stuff like that. And as it went on, I mean, people didn't like fully open yet, but as time went on, I started to see like, I mean, these people are really cool. They have really amazing stories. They put a lot of time and effort into what they do. It's an amazing craft. Let's talk to these people and interview them, and I can use those interviews for the book, and maybe some of them be good enough standalone videos for the site. And it was when we really started to interview people that we saw, and I always knew because of Joseph Campbell's work, I always knew that our relationships to heroes goes deeper than what you might think on the surface. But it wasn't until we started doing these interviews that I found like people already know that. Like, I thought I was like doing some like, oh, you got to realize like you connect with these heroes for a specific reason. They already had that knowledge. Like I wasn't putting them on to anything new or anything like that as much as I might have wanted to convince myself of that. And there were people we interviewed that, we interviewed a cosplayer dressed up as Anakin who said he connected with Anakin Skywalker because as a child he lost his mother and he related with the pain that Anakin felt when he lost his mother. And he kind of realized like, am I going to allow the pain and the anger consume me and go down that path? Or can I go down a different path and not, give into that anger and maybe do something better? And now he dresses as Anakin Skywalker and he goes to hospitals and visits children and brightens up their day. And, it just showed me, I'm like, this goes so much deeper than even I had thought as someone going in and be like, oh, let me interview these people and kind of like open up their eyes a little bit and say like, see how deep this stuff goes? I'm like, they're teaching me, stuff. We spoke to like a male dressed as Wonder Woman who said I was embarrassed to come to this comic convention dressed as Wonder Woman, but growing up, that was the hero I connected with most. And like now, thankfully, the film's popular, and I don't have to be ashamed of that like I used to be. So we started seeing more and more of these connections, and we're like, okay, we need to do something bigger with this. And if it wasn't for cosplayers opening up to us, there's no way this documentary would be done. Because that's what really made us say like, okay, people already realize this connection. Let's share that with other people who might not.
And then one thing you said there really struck me too was the joy that they bring to other people in the space. I've taken my kid there and just seeing her eyes light up, but also I feel it. If I see someone who's just done a great job, either some sort of crossover cosplayer, like there's been some imagination or some craft, or someone. I think one of the other things I've seen, I see Neil Gaiman tweeting photos of people that are cosplaying as his characters. Mm-hmm. When you are in a fandom that's narrow, that not many people are going to recognize these characters, and saying Neil Gaiman's got a narrow fandom is a weird thing to say, but that not everyone knows who Death is or whatever. If you get into the smaller characters, but when you know and you make that connection, it's very very interesting and very elevating in mood, right? And that's all because that person decided to dress that way and come and express their love of that character.
Yes, and there are multiple reasons why I think people get excited about cosplayers. It could be like you said, it could be like a mashup. It could be, like, oh, you took two things that I love and put it into one. We like to simplify things. Like that's kind of what we all do is, how can we make things as simple as possible? So when you see that mashup, be like, you combine Star Wars with Game of Thrones, like that is an awesome idea. I wish I would have thought of that. And someone else we spoke to made the good point of, with gender bending and race bending of, if I see someone dressed up, if I see a black person dressed up as Batman, how does that make me feel? Is that unsettling? Do I take that as completely why not? And if it does make someone uncomfortable, like explore why. Like why should that be any different? And I think that opens up a lot of doors of like self-exploration too. Of when you see a cosplayer, how does that make you feel? And why might you feel that way?
Yeah, and giving permission to people that are maybe more shy or more worried about how they're going to be perceived. As you said, with the guy dressing up as Wonder Woman, no question that he would have sent the message non-verbally to someone in that crowd that it is okay for you to come dressed as whoever you wanted to, because I did it and look, everything's fine.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Travis Langley did research that kind of showed, like, he surveyed cosplayers at various Comic Cons, and they kind of found that when surveyed, that their self-esteem and confidence was higher than it was, let's say, like a month later. I think they sent them the same kind of survey, and they found that their self-esteem and their confidence was higher than it was, a month later. And I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, yeah. So you've mentioned Travis and Janina as being in the movie. And they're both psychologists. Who else were you talking to in the film?
We spoke with Bob Walter, who's the president of Joseph Campbell Foundation, which was surreal just to meet and talk with someone who like was friends with Joseph Campbell. That was one of my big geek out moments, like, of the whole film. It's kind of weird to like fanboy over like someone from the Joseph Campbell Foundation, but like I was like, this is amazing, like, and I just could have picked his brain forever. Stan Lee obviously was an amazing experience getting to, I'd met him at Comic Cons where you get to chit chat for, 10 seconds and then he signs an autograph and goes on your way. But to literally just be in his office with him, like making, casual conversation while everything is being set up. Like, I mean, that was obviously an unforgettable experience. George R. Martin, was fantastic speaking with him. I had no idea how much of a wealth of knowledge he had about superheroes. Me and literally talking about, like, I mentioned to him something. I think he asked me, like, what's your most prized comic book? And I said, I got a few. I said, I got the first, like, X-Men Sentinels issue. I got the first Silver Surfer. And he's like, that's Fantastic Four number 47 or 48 or so. And I'm like, wow, he got the exact, like, he's not someone that, it's easy. A lot of people just say, like, I like superheroes. Like, I'm into that stuff. But, like, he was just rattling off, like, specific storylines and creators behind those storylines. Like, he knows his stuff, so that was really, really cool to kind of see that of, like, someone who created something I love.
So he's an interesting one because, so I've known about him for a long time, before Game of Thrones, and knew that he had written this book that everyone was talking about was great and one of the great modern fantasy novels, and that was maybe when the first one came out. But where I knew him from was a superhero book series, Wild Cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's two things there. One is that superhero love that he has, and I think he used to write letters into Stan Lee, right? As a
yeah, that was his first published work.
Yeah, right. So
yeah, I wish I would have got him to read that letter on camera. It would have been a great. I saw another documentary or a History Channel special that did that. I thought it was a really good idea.
So that it ties a lot in, right? So he's writing the kind of the genre defining series that's turned into this massive TV hit. But before that, he was writing superhero fiction. He was role playing, like those characters from Wild Cards came from their role playing game sessions, and is the work on the TV shows being done now. So I don't know how much he's got to do with it. I'm sure he's an executive producer or something, but that's going to be really interesting to see if a superhero show can take off in as big a way as Wild Cards. Like, clearly they've taken over the movies, but there's obviously some popular superhero shows on TV, but they're not something where you can assume that someone else in the cafe is watching religiously as well. Right.
It's tough, and unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to how much money is a company willing to invest, how patient are they willing to be, the special effect. I mean, that's why, like, growing up for us, like, that was a lot of the reasons you couldn't get a superhero movie right is, Superman, obviously, in the late 70s was, like, a game changer, but then it seemed like we kind of regressed back into, okay, we'll make a movie, but we're not going to really, like, invest in these, like, the costumes and the special effects and things like that. And it just wasn't being done right. And it seemed like, are we ever going to see a good superhero movie again? Or, like you mentioned, like fantasy, like who knew? But, once Lord of the Rings, the movies came out and they put some money behind those, it kind of showed like what you could do when you invest. And I think that's going to maybe be the difference for Wild Cards is, are they going to try to do this low budget, or are they willing to kind of, go a little bit further with it?
Yeah, I'll have to have a look at that. I'm not sure who's making it.
think
Like,
it's Sci-Fi Network, but I'm not sure.
okay. So that makes it tough for it to blow up.
Exactly, and that's
Yeah.
the thing. I'm like, it's one thing to have that HBO money, but the Sci-Fi Network, I
Yeah.
don't know, and I think George R. R. Martin, I think he might be only associated with by name. I think they've got a lot of writers
Yeah.
of the books
Yeah.
involved, but I think he's not allowed to be that hands-on because I think until Game of Thrones is done, he pretty much has to be,
Right.
tied up
Right.
with that.
Right. So, tell us about how we might be able to see the movie. I'm hoping to convince you to let me screen it at the cinema here, or the theater, I should say, the old theater here in our town. But what are people's ability to get to see the film?
Right now, that is exactly what we were trying to figure out. We had our world premiere last night at Phoenix Film Festival, and right now we're running a Kickstarter. So if anyone wants to jump on Kickstarter, Geek You Shall Find, we launched that a couple weeks ago. We're almost halfway to our goal, and we basically are realizing that we thought the tough part was over. We thought making a film is the tough part, but all the expenses that come in I mean, you can't get on iTunes until you have a film, subtitled. Like all these different, you've got to have different like exports of the film. You have to authorize like a Blu-ray, which is a whole big expense onto itself. So all these little things that we're like, we thought everything was covered at this point. We're like, it's going to cost us more money to do the post-production stuff than it costs us to make it.
Yeah.
I mean, a big part of that is too, we made it over the course of 2 years, so that spending is kind of spread out. Like, you go to a comic convention, and then a few months later, but right now that the film's done, we're like, okay, we need this, we need this, we need this, and everything started building up. So like, let's take it to Kickstarter, see what we can do, and kind of build a nest for ourselves to be able to do subtitles and to be able to figure out like, how do we approach like the Hulus and the Amazons and the Netflixes of the world. So that's our next step right now.
Right. So if they go to Kickstarter.com and just search for Geek and You Shall Find.
Yep, we'll be right there.
Awesome.
We're at that 40% mark, I think. So would appreciate. I mean, and I want people to keep in mind, like anything helps. Like not even just fiscally. Like yeah, it's great to say like any amount, but sharing it. You never know who you're gonna share it with that might see it and want. I mean, if you share it with 100 other people and 5 of those people pledge, even if you didn't, you still helped. So I think a lot of times. It's really interesting. I don't know why I've gone into this like 3 times in the past like 3 days. So maybe there's something to be said for that. But one of the things that Bob Walters said that stuck out to me most, and we didn't use it. There's so much good stuff that we did not use. It is unbelievable. I said that during the Q&A yesterday, one of the really good questions someone asked is like, what was the toughest thing to leave out? And I said, oh, we can make 5 more movies based on stuff that I would have sworn would have gotten in. But one of the points Bob Walter made was about we have a habit of kind of plucking out a single hero from a story and not really realizing that it takes a team. And, he's like, Jason didn't get the Golden Fleece. It was Jason and the Argonauts. And, even Odysseus had, a ship full of men. Like, but in our culture nowadays, we like to pluck out the single hero and say, look at what this, man or woman did.
Yeah.
And he said, it doesn't work like that in the real world. We have to realize, like, even the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and all of these people who accomplish these great things, they had people, working behind the scenes with them to make these things possible, like organizing and, like getting, legal, like what could we do legally? It literally takes a village. But for some reason, we've really gotten caught up in this whole idea of like, it's one person can make a difference, and one person can, but you got to realize like there are a number of ways to do it. And just because you're not the star, at center stage doesn't mean you're not putting in the work to make that all possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if people can help with subtitles, that's something you'd be open to as well, if they can contribute working out how to do that or doing some transcribing or...
Yeah, we even talked about the other day, we're like, okay, because even the transcribing part, we're like, that's going to be, work onto itself. So we're like, do we split this up between the 5 of us and we each take 20 minutes of the film? But even at that point, then you still need to get the closed captioning actually done. And I think you need like an organization to actually do that for you. So then we started looking, okay, they charge per minute. So I'm like, you get to a point where there's some things you could say like, okay, let's just do it ourselves. Like, yeah, it's not gonna be a fun time, but we can do it. We need to do it, you know. But there's some things we literally just don't have the resources for, the you know, the ability to do, and those are the things we're like, okay, we need to ask for help on this stuff. So
Yep.
yes, if anyone out there like knows anyone that can do this professionally and you know help us get it done, yes, exactly. That's great. Like all those things help too. Like it doesn't mean you have to donate or pledge to make a difference. Like everyone has different ways of helping.
So, on that note, if someone wanted to talk to you, whether it's offering help or asking questions about the film or trying to get it in front of audiences, how do they get you? What's the best way to contact you?
We're on social. We're at Superhero Faces on Twitter and Facebook is at Superhero Faces, and Instagram is at super_faces. It's the only one we can't get the hero faces for right now, so we got to get that underscore in between the two. But Twitter at Superhero Faces and on Facebook are both. You know, we're responsive. We have someone managing the social media full time now, which is a gigantic help. So,
and the website then for if they're emailing you, you can get it through that.
you can like that email like I'm not as good at keeping up with, and I want to make sure people. So I'm just being honest. Like I want to make sure I get back to everybody one way or the other. But the quickest way is to drop us a message on like Facebook Instant Messenger or Twitter. Follow us and you know send us a message. We're really good, and I promise I will try to get in a better habit of checking on my Superhero Faces email, which I don't do as much.
No, that's good to know, though. That's good to know that Twitter and Facebook.
I want people to be able to get a hold of us in the easiest way possible. I'm like, you know, the contact us is great and that helps us keep organized, but it's one of those things like you get to like every 2 weeks and you're like, all right, let me catch up on a few emails versus like the social media. We have someone consistently checking every day. Well, you'll get a more immediate response.
And what about in person? Have you got Comic Cons lined up soon? Are you going to San Diego?
I will be at San Diego as a fan. We actually are speaking. It's next week already. We got asked to speak at the Texas Library Association. Has their it's the biggest librarian conference in the country. It's once a year, every year in a different city in Texas, and we've been asked to come out and kind of speak about implementing comic books in libraries and why that might be important. So,
great.
Not sure if we're going in. You usually go into a situation, you're like, okay, I'm going to be with my people right now. Like, I'm talking to fellow geeks. Like, so I don't know if this is going to be kind of different. I don't know if we're going to be speaking with people who maybe are apprehensive and want to know, like, why this might be a good thing. Or if it's people who are like, hey, help us, give us some, you know, research backing to take to the people. Like, see, did you know, like, this was discussed in a comic book one time and you know, that mouse, you know, can teach you about the Holocaust, you know, so maybe they're kind of looking for a little bit of guidance, which I'm hoping is the case rather than going into kind of the belly of the whale and kind of being like, oh.
I think the subset of geeks within librarians is probably pretty large.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Hopefully, yeah, they're in our corner. That's true.
And maybe if you lead with that idea that geeks are just people who are passionate about something, then they'll all be on your side.
That's a good point. And, you know, especially comic book fans are passionate about reading. You know, so
absolutely.
Whatever the medium might be, it really doesn't change that much.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to leave it here so people can contact you. You've done a pretty good job of explaining the film, I think. So as far as finding out when people will be able to see it, just follow you on Twitter, and you'll be making announcements when there's opportunities to see the film.
Updates and we are gonna. I know this only helps people in Phoenix right now, but because our screening last night sold out, and we even had producers who had like friends and family who weren't able to buy their tickets because it sold out like a week in advance. So we had like co-producers saying, my dad never got his ticket, like, you know, or like my sister wasn't able to get her ticket in time. We didn't expect that to happen. So we're going to rent out like a local theater here and do a screening at possibly Film Bar, which is like a local place in Phoenix. So I know that doesn't help a lot of people like outside, but we're definitely open to, you know, different ideas if people want to have screenings out of the theaters, and we can help to make that happen. Like absolutely. Like our goal is to just get this seen by as many people as possible.
Perfect. Well, on that note, I think I'll leave you here. Thanks for being here. Good luck with the movie. I'm looking forward to watching it myself and then getting it in front of people here in Southern Australia.
Thank you so much. Anything we can do to help, we're happy to.
Awesome. All right. Thank you again. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, man. Sounds good.